the creative journey. It's easy to get lost, but don't worry, you'll lift off. Sometimes you just need a creative pep talk.
Hey, you're listening to Creative Pep Talk, a weekly podcast companion for your creative journey. I'm your host, Andy J. Pizza. I'm a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator. And this show is just everything I'm learning about building and maintaining a thriving creative practice. Let's get into it. We have a real treat for you in this episode. It is a conversation with author Katherine May. I have been so excited to share this with you, and I was so looking forward to having this conversation. It was such an enjoyable chat, and I was really inspired and moved, as I am by Katherine's work. I was introduced to Katherine's books by my wife, Sophie, who has a aesthetic kinship to the kind of stuff that Katherine explores with going on walks and understanding and feeling the joy of small things and being in your body, and all things that honestly I really struggle with as an ADHD person. And for that reason, Katherine's writing is almost medicinal to me. It has this really profound effect, and it can just really hit me, and it's very meaningful to me. You might know Katherine from her books, Enchantment or Wintering or The Electricity of Every Living Thing. My way in was that book, Electricity. I got into it because it is a memoir about her midlife autism diagnosis, and I was reading it to prepare for making our series Right Side Out about ADHD that we did earlier this year in 2024. And I highly recommend the book. I'm in Enchantment now, and it's just bringing me so much life. And so we started the year with this focus on neurodivergence and owning who you are. And we went into the summer with this slow and steady burnout recovery period. And that's really what Enchantment's all about, which is her latest book. And it's just given me so much. So I feel like this is the perfect guest for this year, the show. And it was just an absolute delight. Stick around for the end, and I will come back with a CTA that I'm calling Post-it Note Ritual. And I'll be back to talk about how you can not add new things to your life or constantly shifting, trying the brand new thing to see if you can feel good again, but how you can bake something, just one thing, into your everyday that might help you recover from burnout and stay more creatively regulated. And so I'll be back for that. In this chat, we talk about all kinds of things. We talk about the kind of balance between mystical creativity and systematic creativity. We kind of chop it up around the hero's journey and go at that from two very different perspectives. And we also explore tapping into the creative things that your brain automatically does and how to recognize those things so that you can put the best of that into your work in a way that comes with ease and flow. So look out for all that stuff. And I'll be back at the end to give you a creative call to adventure on how to put some of these ideas into practice. I was introduced really to your work by my wife, who is British, and also I'm ADHD, so I find the world deeply understimulating. And so she helps, she has some other energy that helps me kind of stay present. And it's probably a little closer to your way of being. And so, she introduced me to your work when I was we were co-writing this series about, ADHD and neurodivergence and kind of positive self-psychology stuff. And, so later I'd like to get into a little bit of that, but,
okay.
It's your writing and your work has been really, really powerful for me. So first of all, just thanks for that.
It's really nice that it lands somewhere. You send it out into the world and you're never sure.
I know. And it's interesting because when I first got into your work, I'm about halfway through your latest book, Enchantment, which has been super timely for me. It's what I didn't know that I needed. But I got into your work from the electricity of every living thing. And it was kind of research, because I was doing all this work on neurodivergence. And I just, it's so interesting how, my creative practice, there's the part of it that's like an outpouring of who I am. And then there's also part of it that's like self-regulating, almost like medication. It's like not even
stimming, kind of soothing, kind of,
But it goes outside of what comes natural. What comes natural for me is, just burning white hot ADHD action all the time. And so I'm really interested in that space between what comes natural and then what you need to do that maybe it doesn't come natural because you need to add it to your system. And your work is really like that for me. And so I think some people that are like me may not realize how much of a balm your ability to be present is. And halfway through this Enchantment book, I really had to pause because I just had tears streaming down my face because I have such a hard time accessing this. And I was just so moved. So thank you so much.
That makes me really happy. And I had to really learn it, my tendency as with loads of autistic people is to sort of retreat into my head because the outside world feels so unsafe so often. And I mean, I don't know if this is a proper phrase, but I think that loads of neurodivergent people have got a kind of sensory trauma almost where we have been forced through things that feel uncomfortable or painful so many times, or that we know feels wrong in our bodies, but we've been told that it's right, like anything from sort of sitting still to being in an incredibly noisy room, and you're told that, no, this is just normal and you should be able to cope with this. And my default has always been to retreat into my head, which is why I'm a writer, because that's where, that's where I find stories.
Yeah.
And I've, over the last, nearly 20 years now, I took up meditation, and I was like, everyone else says to me now, oh, I wouldn't be able to meditate. I can't sit still. I can't concentrate. Hi, me too. But I knew I needed it. I knew I needed to figure it out. And I found so much solace there, and it's changed the quality of my attention. But it's only since I wrote Electricity that I've really, really realized the need to come back into my body and to live there again. And I'm still in process with that. It's hard. It's hard to be there sometimes. But it is rewarding for sure when I manage it.
And the thing that really fascinates me, and this is like an oversimplification, obviously everybody's experience with neurodivergence, ADHD, autism is very different and nuanced, but I have, over the years, had a lot of autistic friends that I'm kind of gravitate towards. And the thing and this is also true about your books, where I live, my tendency is to live in my head. My tendency is to disassociate in that kind of way, but for the opposite reason. And it's because I find the presence so understimulating that I will be
boring here.
That I spent most of my childhood like in fantasy, literally just like I'm in class and I'm just imagining things that are way more interesting than what's happening.
Yeah.
And so your descriptions and encounters with everyday things, the thing that touched me was I'd figured out last week how to get present in taking my youngest kid to the grocery store. And that's a real challenge for me, not just to do. It's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to enjoy it, but somehow I enjoyed it that day. I figured out how to, and you had a line in your book about handwriting, your grandmother's handwriting, and the grocery list, which are really the most important things. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like I had touched that today. But it's so fascinating because it feels like it's coming from the opposite place, but finding the right level of stimulation by getting into your body.
Although I think it is similar. I mean, yes, definitely. Like I'm often escaping because I'm overstimulated, and I'm like, I cannot be in here. Everything's clanking, and people are getting near to me, and there's like all this kind of conflicting information. And that's definitely like when I curl up in my little snail shell. But I find that the world runs very slowly compared to the inside of my head, and I find a lot of things just incredibly boring. Like boredom is one of my defining experiences, I think.
Me too.
and one of my first realizations when I realized I was autistic was this like sort of consistent feeling I'd had when I was in a room full of people that everyone else was numb. And like, of course that doesn't make any sense because other people being numb is not in the field of my experience. But what I really meant was how unreactive they were to the world from what I could see. So whereas I wanted to kind of flinch and run away or like respond to the sensory overload, they were not responding. And I couldn't fully make sense of that as a response. And I think on top of that, like we autistic people are really well known for like going straight to the point. Like we don't care about small talk. We find it really tedious and really pointless and such a waste of time. And that added to this sense of numbness coming at me from the people. Because why do they want to talk about really boring things when we could like ask each other about whether we believe in God or how to solve the massive questions of existence? Like that's the only conversation I care about.
Yes. That's amazing. And
I get your boredom.
And like I said, I know that it's an oversimplification because there's all this nuance like you're bringing into that. But I also my close friends that I've had over the years that are autistic, it also feels almost like passing notes to the other part of the brain that I don't always have access to. It almost feels that there's such a similar quality to the, I think there's the similarity of just not feeling normal, not feeling like neurotypical. But that then there's also just
outsidership.
But then there's also just this and that's one of the things that's not boring about those people is that it's like, I have just no idea where you're going to go with this because I can't even foresee it. And there's a quickness. So I love all of that stuff. But I wanted to talk about, your latest book, Enchantment, because, we just did a series on the show over the summer, which was the Slow and Steady series. I was publicly trying to come out of burnout. In just some difficult spaces in my work. And, the obvious answer for that, I think, is slow down, get more steady, all that. And I think those things are true. But I started reading your book, not thinking of it being connected to that. Not thinking the idea that enchantment was really connected to that because it didn't seem like an obvious solve. And yet that's kind of exactly what it's about. And I can see how much that magic is a huge part of what's making me retreat or shut down. So I wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about, because a little bit about what brought you into that space, and also why the word enchantment. I love how authors can kind of imbue new meaning into words. And when you say enchantment, you're meaning something that wasn't immediately obvious to me, but it also is like a word that I think we need. It's something that's like, this is something we need to be able to talk about, you know?
It's a slightly tricky word to use in a way, because it's become freighted with like all this kind of really tacky sort of Disneyfied stuff. Like, oh, it's like pink butterflies and sparkles and magic and unicorns. And I, you know, like when we were first publishing the book, I kept joking to no one's amusement that I'd love a unicorn on the front of the book, please. And preferably some like a nice foily kind of, you know, holographic background. I wasn't entirely unserious. I didn't get my wish. But I tried to avoid using it for that reason, but it just kept coming up in my language. Like it was this repeated word that I couldn't help but notice. And I loved the sense that enchantment has got this link to the word song, you know, that it's a sung kind of spell. And this sense that it's active and passive, that enchantment can be something that lands on you, or it can be something that you do to the world. It's a sort of exchange. I also like the kind of witchy spelliness about it too. And as I was writing the book, and this never made it in, but I read a Welsh myth called the Mabinogion. And one of the cycles of that is medieval, is that a fog falls over the kingdom, and it's like this literal kind of enchantment rolls in. And I sort of connected that to the pandemic, this sense that a fog can roll in to the whole of the world, and then you have to find your way back home again, which is what the characters kind of do. Logically, I should have actually written that, but sometimes it's nice to just keep things for yourself.
And podcasts.
So all of these ideas came together.
And put them on podcasts.
That's right. I mean, it gives you something to talk about afterwards in the long term of it. But that fog is really meaningful to me because of that sense of burnout, and that sense that I was in, that my cognition had slowed down to the point where I felt like I was barely able to access my own thoughts. And, you know, it meant that time was skipping in weird ways, and I was feeling kind of physically exhausted, but also just not human, you know, dazed. And that was the beginning of the book, really. Like, what can you do when you feel this burnt out? Like, how do you recover your sense of self? Because that's what it obliterates. And I realized quite soon on that the answer wasn't just what had happened in the immediate past, but I needed to think about my long-standing habits of thought that were keeping me from feeling refreshed on a, you know, like being able to renew and refresh myself. So not many unicorns, tragically, because unicorns, you know,
what's really grabbed me about that is thinking about enchantment in two different ways there, where, you know, there's the enchantment that pulls you out of the fog, and then the idea that the fog is an enchantment. And it reminds me kind of one of my ongoing creative threads, because I make picture books and most of the stuff I do has to do with storytelling, is how the conflict and the obstacle is always the means in which the character gets what they need. Maybe it blocks what they want, but it's how they end up getting what they actually need. And it's just interesting to think of, and then the burnout phases are really your body giving you what you need, saying, okay, well, you can't keep doing this.
You need to stop, and I'm going to stop you.
Instead of seeing it as, just an obstacle in the way.
Absolutely. If we're going to talk about it in narrative terms, I always love the John Yorke definition of a story, which is, I mean, this is going to be a wild misquote, but it's about going into the woods and bringing something back for your home. And I love that little
That's
coda
really
for your home at the end of the sentence.
Yeah.
You know, it's not bringing treasure back. It's like bringing something back that you need, as you say. And I mean, that's what my book Wintering was about. You know, it was about not these moments, which is often what people assume it's about, like these moments when you think, oh, I'm going to have a nice little rest for a while and then I'm going to come back having had a spa day. It's like the points when you are taken down by life, and often because you've been resisting stopping and thinking for such a long time, and you've been pushing on through like all the signals that your body sent you and all the signals that your mind sent you, and you've just bloody mindedly kept going on through. I think that's my territory, because I know it so well, because I've done it to myself so many times, and it's like, it feels like my purpose in life to tell people to stop doing it.
And I love this idea, because this is what I assume people go seek out a book like Wintering, because they're like, all right, tell me how to avoid the winter. Like what, you know, like how, right, you know, in some kind of weird way, I think that's what I would be thinking. And that is kind of what I was thinking entering Enchantment of. I'm not thinking about like, oh yeah, let's enter the fog. Like let's really go into it.
Whereas I'm like, let's get in the fog. Come on, the fog is really good.
and there is. I mean, it's the only way. And I think, okay, so could you maybe talk a little bit about what Enchantment is for you? Because I think it's, you know, this is mainly for creative people, and I think that burnout is a ongoing thing, but also is this like loss of inspiration, loss of passion. I think a lot of that comes through part of just the job and you know, every day, but also as you get older, you just lose your sense of magic, especially in our modern day. We don't have that as much of a ritual and connection to this stuff. So I don't know if you could talk a little bit about why you needed that, and then what you came out with, and how maybe that relates to also your creativity.
Yeah. I mean, like, you'll know this better than most people, but children have got this innate sense of magic, and it's not about the big things. It's about the tiny things, you know, like kids you'll walk down the street with them, and before you know it, they've got like a tiny nondescript pebble in their hand, and they're like, their whole life is in the palm of their hand. And like, you can't even access that. And I like, yes, we all lose it, but I think we work quite hard to lose it. And I think we're trained very carefully to lose that sense of wonder, you know, from the parents saying, come on, hurry up, you're taking ages, which God knows I've done enough times to my own child, to this kind of teenage sense that it's cool to be cynical. And, you know, for me, like, I'm the generation that thought Richard Dawkins was a really great idea. And like all of that stuff, I thought was me being a really good, rational adult and learning to grow up. And it took me a long time to feel this real sense of loss over that. And this, you know, this restriction, actually, this kind of forbidden space that I wasn't allowed to think in, and I wasn't allowed to engage in magical thinking, you know. And Enchantment was a really hard book for me to write, because I felt embarrassed to say, oh no, wait, I need it. I actually really need this. I need to re-engage with this sense of absolute awe at a stupid pebble, like a completely stupid pebble. I need that feeling. And I'm not willing to wait for it, you know, to go on a holiday of a lifetime and see the Niagara Falls or something equally expensive. Like, I need it in my everyday. I deserve it. And I don't think I can carry on functioning without it. And I need permission to think in a completely different way, like a much more symbolic way, a much more ruminative way, rather than carrying on being grown up and practical. And so, sorry, that's not answering your question. You asked what enchantment is for me. I think enchantment's like the sort of ongoing practice of wonder, of deliberate wonder, of intentional wonder, that you know, that's there to just take great care of you.
And I'm glad you went into the practice of it, because I want to circle back real quick to that in a second to that. But, you know, this has been on my mind a lot lately. When I first started the podcast, so I was doing commercial illustration at the time. It was before I really had got much into picture books. I was doing a lot of client work and that kind of thing. And I kind of started it with I don't necessarily disagree with this now, but I started it with a feeling that all of the conversation around creativity within creative circles had become so overly spiritualized. And like,
interesting.
For me as a person,
sort of mysterious.
Pure mystery and, you know, mysticism and that kind of thing. And for me personally, that was fine for the most part, because I am prone to that way of being. Like that, that is my natural gear in life, is to be that way. But I think at the time I was really frustrated by when you know, the pendulum swings back and forth, and there's like good things that happen as that kind of goes through history, and the overly mystical view on creativity. I just felt like there were
exactly. Are we about the same age?
I think so. Yeah. I'm 38, and I'm
10 years older than you, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
But I do. Yeah. We're probably right in the same zone with this. And I think, that I was just fed up with, and the same thing with like a Richard Dawkins of unchecked spirituality or religion it's so vague and abstract, and it's so in the world of feelings that there's so much manipulation that can happen, and there are a lot of dangers, you know, which I don't have to tell you that you absolutely know that. But,
and like it's about democratization as well, isn't it? I think that was often my problem with it. It's like, oh, you know, these people have got this mysterious gift, and they're not one of you. Yeah. And like I was like a working class kid growing up in a council house, and like I knew that wasn't in my house, you know. And actually, like quite often what was seen as this mystical gift was like a privileged upbringing that made space and gave you money to do that. And I felt full on resistance to that.
So true. Yeah. So true. And that's a great example of exactly what I mean of there's so many different, or just, you know, that, and also things like, the more that the people that are established play it up and it creates boundaries Mystique. Like, I don't know how it works. It just comes to me, and you're sat there like with a pencil, just trying to force something to happen. And you feel like, well, it can't be that. So there's all these, you know, I was just aware of, so the first, even though, like myth and journey were big parts of the show all the way from the start, I was always really careful of, I don't want to take that slant. I want to talk about research about creativity and all that stuff. Yeah. But I think over time, both in my personal life and my creative life, I've realized that we could be talking about the same things. We can be talking about reality, but we are not going to be able to access the inspiration if we don't do it through the lens of metaphor and symbolism. And I don't want to use those words as if that means we're talking about stuff that's not true. It's just a more powerful way of talking
of thinking. Yes. They're part of our toolkit. Yeah. I mean, I have this, it's really interesting to hear you say that, because I have this like still gut reaction against the hero's journey. Like, don't ever talk to me about it. It makes me angry. I've never read it. Like, it's just that all the people that have ever really loved it have pissed me off. And
that's hilarious.
It's probably great. But when I read Electricity, sorry.
Go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, just for your context, the listeners know that I am a huge hero's journey person. However, I'm also a big heroine's journey person. And I've kind of, that was also about a decade ago. I still love it. And I totally understand.
I don't know why I'm so cross with it, but it's that like.
I understand. I'm just giving you the context of it. But I get it.
but you know, like when I sat down to write Electricity and I realized I was writing about a literal journey and a journey of discovery, and there were loads of the elements of the hero's journey in it, I had this real, like, I will not do this. I am not going to do this. I absolutely refuse, you know. And so actually I don't complete the journey. And I was delighted with myself over that.
That's
like
really
I deliberately disrupted the journey, because it's like, I am not doing the heroic thing.
Yeah.
And and I had a similar thing with The Artist's Way, which everybody loves except me.
Yeah.
And I read it and found it like, I think exactly what you're talking about, like woolly and overly optimistic. And I wanted an account of my creativity that was about showing up and working.
Yeah, exactly.
And doing all those kind of hard bits, and like knowing that I didn't have the privilege to just let my creativity float out there. I had to make it work. I had to earn money from it. I had, you know, all of that sort of thing. And now I think I probably really need to revisit that book, because I think I've probably been unkind for it. But at that time in my life, it would never have served me to think in that way. I couldn't leave stuff to enough chance to get involved in this like beautiful pink cloud of creativity. I had to find the system and the labor in it, and the grunt work. That was the only way I knew how to do it.
Exactly. And I feel exactly the same. And my response to, you know, the Artist's Way, or even things, people like Rick Rubin, I don't have I just have I don't disagree with much I've heard either of those people say. It's just more that way of thinking about it. I just had initial, you know, kind of negative reaction for all sorts of reasons. And a big part of it is just that a lot of those ideas, if they're unchecked, they can really take off the responsibility on the artist to have habits and show up and do the work and feel the difficulty of it, because that's a huge part of it for me. And then, you know, I also, in my time, you know, Hero's Journey was a big thing for me when I was in my 20s. It kind of was, I didn't even think of it as a creative thing or a writer's thing, even though later it informed a lot of story things. Yeah. But it was really important to me at that point, almost more as a spiritual thing or a psychological thing. But the further I've gotten into story, now I've dove into 15 books or something about it and all these different perspectives. I definitely understand people's impulse to push back on. There's some really pervasive kind of like dogmatism that comes with Hero's Journey fanboys, Joseph Campbell fanboys.
I think it's the fanboys rather than the book that annoy me, to tell you the truth. You know, it's this like, we know everything. We know how stories are made. We've got a system. And every story follows this system. And I'm like, and it's not true. And it's all, watch me break it.
I mean, the whole idea of as soon as there's a right way in creativity, it's the wrong way. Like, you know, that's the whole notion. But I totally feel that.
I think what's really interesting to add in at this point, when people do ask me things like, where do your stories come from? I have to say, I have no idea. Like they do, I do often feel like I'm channeling something that I've got no access to, like no kind of conscious access to. And I don't feel like the inventor of a lot of my work. I feel like I create the circumstances in which it can happen. And I love that kind of Picasso quote. I think when inspiration comes, I want it to find me working. Yeah. Something along those lines. Yeah. That's my part, is that I show up. But I would have to admit that I cannot explain a lot of what happened, what comes out. Like it doesn't, I don't make it in any sort of
And I think that is the aim. I feel like all the stuff that I make within that. And so I feel like what's really interesting about this is we're talking a both and kind of way where
Yeah.
we're talking about what, as a creative person, maybe grosses us out about systems and logic.
Gives us the ick. Yeah.
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 And then also what can feel that way when it gets overly mystical, and that there's this way in between where you don't have to know how it works. Because even as you're saying, you know, I always feel, I don't know if you feel like this, but having put out a bunch of books and a bunch of podcasts and stuff, you can never put enough nuance into the actual experience of it. And, you know, when you say that it can feel like channeling, I completely agree with that. And I also feel like, and I don't know what it is, but I actually like the idea that I could see it from both angles. I could see it from, well, it's the same thing that happens when you have a dream, is that it's not in your control. Yeah. It's coming from, it's instantly coming from somewhere else. And there's, you know, and we don't fully understand that either.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm compelled to say I edit like hell as well. So I do then, there's so much of me in that bit. Yeah. But also, I don't know if you've got to this bit in Enchantment yet, and I think it's later in the book, so maybe not. Okay. But I write about Julian James's book, The Origins of Consciousness in the Something of the Bicameral Mind. It's such a long title.
I haven't got to that yet.
Of the Bicameral Mind. Okay, you're gonna like this, because it's like this weird, completely unsupported book about neurology, I guess, where from like the 60s, where James, and it's the thing with it is it's beautifully written and it's so compelling, but also almost certainly wrong. Yeah. But he puts forward this incredibly well argued theory that in our early evolution, our brains were in two halves. The two halves weren't joined together yet, and therefore we received information from different sides of our brain to the other side of the brain as if they were the voice of God. Yeah. And so we evolved feeling that we were in direct conversation with God all the time inside our head, when it was actually that we just didn't have access to one half of our brain. And loads of neuroscientists. I
have got to this part. I have got to this part, but keep going, because I did absolutely love this. Keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I loved it when I first read it, you know, always aware that it's not the gospel of how the brain works. Yeah. Yeah. And loads of neuroscientists do for the same thing. And like what David Eagleman says about it is, we don't actually have a better theory. We don't think this one is right, but we don't have anything better. Like it's outlandish, but like it's one of many outlandish theories we have about how the brain honestly operates and how it evolved. But I like it on a metaphorical level. I love the way it lets me think about creativity in all honesty, because that's, if I had to pin down a theory of how creativity operates for me, I would say the bicameral mind. Sure. Why not? Yeah. Because where else is this stuff coming from? I don't know.
Yes. And just so cause I want to make sure that I get it and that the listeners get it too. He's saying, and by the way, as an aside, one of the things I think a lot about is, what could be a great relationship between creative thinking and scientific thinking. A lot of times I think what a problem that happens is when creatives are trying to say, this is literally how it is, when it's an intuitive like idea, or when scientists won't be creative in their ideas. I think most scientists that I have met actually acknowledge the power of intuitive thinking and how much it's led the way through scientific thought, because you need the hypothesis. And you need like, even if it's wrong, it's a way of like opening up preconception. So you need that kind of dialogue between these kind of philosophical ideas that are not true, maybe literally, or could be. But I think that to me, as I was going through that chapter, and I absolutely loved it. This is my kind of juice. As soon as you're getting into it, I was like, oh man. But that we need, to me, it sounds almost like, oh, it's not only just an interesting theory. what a great premise for a book. What a great premise for a world in which things work that way. Yeah,
exactly. Like, it's this great leap of imagination, and it's an attempt. Like, I love attempts. You know what I mean? Like, he's tried to think it through, and also, like, he draws on loads of early literature to try and prove his point, and gets a load of that wrong too, you know, because as soon as you examine it closely, what he says happens doesn't happen. You know, he says that, I think it's the Iliad that just, you know, shows that this is happening in the characters in there. And I don't care. Like, I love flights of fantasy. You know, like, it's got no bearing on my real life.
It's a great It's a great metaphor for thinking about how it is to be, and how to be a creative person. And just in case, I want to make sure I get it right. How I'm thinking about what you're saying is, essentially, in the book, you talk about how we take for granted that we have this kind of emergent one voice that is us in our brain.
A sense of self, like a really clear, access to all the elements of our thought. Yeah.
And that and that they're one perspective, even though, you know, you take the IFS look, or you take a little bit further peek behind it, you realize that there's many perspectives that are very argumentative, usually, at least in my head. And he's proposing that there was a time where we were all hearing voices. We were hearing these different perspectives in our brains, and some of them were attributed to God. We're thinking, oh, God's just speaking to us, essentially. Is that kind of what he was saying?
There's no evidence of this, but that people believe that they were in constant and personal dialogue with God, that was a voice directly inside their head. And I just, do you know what? I just love the way Julian James's mind works. That book is, I mean, honestly, it's inches fat.
Yeah.
It's a labor of love to get through it, but his prose is beautiful. And what you're doing when you read that book is wandering around the mind of undoubtedly a genius, but geniuses don't always get stuff right.
Yeah.
And I am deeply okay with that, because he didn't get stuff right in not only a harmless way, but in like a really enriching, gorgeous, immersive way.
Yeah.
It's hard to have that conversation, isn't it, in our current era? It's like, things have got to be either right or wrong. Things have got to be science or art. Like, actually, no, we can just immerse ourselves in the gorgeousness of some ways of thinking and some ideas. And it's safe for us to do that. Nothing bad happens. Julian James.
And I'm very interested in that because of being a creative, and also then having a podcast that's attempting to be more nonfiction-y. Because it's a delicate space. I think there's something of taking the work seriously and not yourself, that quote, at all, not taking yourself so seriously. So, like, creating a world where I think your books are great at this, of like, these are a personal perspective that, where I'm kind of poetically working through things, and it doesn't feel positioned
there is like a journey. I hate didactic books. Like, I've got no interest in being told. Like, I'm just a horrible, rebellious teenager still. You could never tell me anything, and you still can't. I'm sorry. I want the experience of learning.
Yeah.
I've just got no interest in having it ready-made. I tell you, I don't know if you know Kristen Hirsch, the songwriter and musician.
I don't know if I do.
Well, she was my teen hero, and my adult hero too. But you have this intense relationship with people.
Sure.
I've just interviewed her for my Substack. So excited about that.
Cool.
And she's written a book called, I'm going to get it right by picking it up, The Future of Songwriting. And it's really a book about creativity. And one of the points that she makes in there is that songwriters, and therefore I think writers and artists and creative people, are medicine. They are offering medicine.
Yeah.
But they are not, that you have to remove the ego for that. Like, we're just a conduit for that medicine to come to our audience. And that therefore there's necessary humility in that. Like, you have to realize how small you are as the deliverer of that medicine, because you're not fully in control of what that medicine is. And that made sense of so many things for me, really. Just this feeling of like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? What is this thing that I'm doing? Because I don't think I've got the answers, but I know I have to acknowledge that people find answers in my book.
Definitely.
And I think she has captured that relationship better than anything I've ever read, honestly. I think she really has thought about her role there and what she offers and what we offer. And it's really gorgeous.
I love that. I love the idea of the conduit and the you're the messenger, but you're not creating the message. And there's a good kind of both and way of holding something where you're doing something important, but it's also not you that's doing it fully or something in that vein. The other thing it makes me think, you
can step down,
and I think the other thing it makes me think is I keep thinking about this. So I've mentioned a few times on the show. I heard Mike Birbiglia on his podcast talking about how essential it is to have stand-up friends for him, because the best stuff that he does is so natural to him that it feels like nothing. And it gets back really to this thing of channeling. And when I read your books, there's some things about your way of being that are so different to me that and it's funny because nobody thinks of me as a meditative person at all. I'm the opposite of whatever that is. Right. And, so when I was, in my 20s, I would have not sought out books like yours. And yet there's something so medicinal about it. Like, it's like, it hits me on such a hard level. And it feels like you say, there's definitely a lot of levels to it that feel, just you being you, and this thing of being able to notice what helped you be able to capture those things? Because I think about this. I also heard Jerry Seinfeld say back in the day that he's like a joke chuck. So there's like woodchucks. You just have to figure out, like, what does your brain do? And then being able to notice what does it just naturally produce. And that also gets to this channeling thing, how did you get acquainted? Because it seems even more as you've gone along, you're more aware of, like, this is what I do.
Yeah. I mean, I think writing Electricity of Every Living Thing changed that, because I'd set out to write a really straightforward memoir about walking. And it was really supposed to be about motherhood and how you come to terms with being a parent and, like, how you process that huge life event. And along the way, I realized I was autistic and realized it was a book about autistic experience, but also about that I was actually literally, I'd put myself in the situation to learn how to cope with being autistic, which I didn't know how to do. And so I sort of consciously started to add in the bits that I'd have probably otherwise edited out. Like, my instinct when I write a book is to learn everything about the field and then to just write the core of it. And of course, for writing that book, that included, like, well, who else has lived along this path? Like, what are the stories here? What are the mythologies? I love, I don't know if you have these in your country, but whenever you, in any tourist destination, if you go into like a petrol station, there will be a little rack of kind of thin books of local ghost stories. Someone has really cornered the market in this.
What? I don't know if we do. At first I was just thinking they were like pamphlets, and I'm like, we got pamphlets, but I don't think I have seen this. No.
They're thicker than pamphlets, but they're probably like 50 or 70 pages long.
Okay.
And they're always, they've gathered up and I love these things.
Yeah.
Like, I'm all over them. I've got so many of them. They're terribly written. They're not, they're probably made up. I don't care. I love them.
Yeah.
But so all of that I would do around the route. And I started to think, wait, that is actually, if I've got an autistic brain, then wanting to suck in the knowledge around this place is part of part of that. That's what that leads me to.
Yeah.
And so I started to try and include it. And I realized as I was doing it that was part of my sense making around the world. I didn't want to just think about the basic facts. I wanted to know it deeply. And that's how I approach everything. And so Electricity was still like a pretty straightforward memoir, but it included all these other little stories along the way, like about Jean Rhys and about Samuel Palmer and all these quite sort of weird, outsiderish, visionary people that had been attracted to this path that I was walking. And I felt lineage with them. I came to feel lineage with them. They were attracted to the edge of the world. And so then when I started to write Wintering, I really invited that in fully. I didn't want to tell a story about myself, or not solely. I wanted to create the kind of patchwork, and I was trying to represent the way I think. And that in turn helped me to start to notice that detail, like that's the call and response of knowledge. It's, you learn some stuff and it takes you deeper, and then it raises more questions and you go deeper again. And it's this beautiful cycle. It's a recursive loop. It's, and it's definitely how I absolutely work now. And it's changed the quality of my attention.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that kind of process element. It reminds me of Ira Glass talking about how for him, storytelling is this thing of, I'm going to tell you a bit about the story, and then I'm going to tell you how it made me feel. And then I'm going to tell you a bit about it. And that's a huge part of storytelling. And it just has this, I think it's an interesting way to engage in a text or a body of work or research or whatever your substance is, that is kind of the meat of your project, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. There's also this awareness of like, okay, you're engaging with something, and then you have another layer where you're able to notice, okay, how did that make me feel? What was I doing as I was engaging in that? And then that's part of the work. And then it kind of
sort of
cycles.
check in.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I like, in lots of ways, all creative work is a distillation of somebody's quality of attention. So, when I see your work, I understand something about how you perceive the world, and like not just visually, but meaningfully. Like, how do you make meaning around what you see? We will see the same thing and you will construct one set of meanings around it and I will construct another. And I don't think I'll ever get over the thrill of that, of like really encountering someone else's consciousness. I think it's the best we have. And
that's such a challenge too, because I remember, and I don't know if this was just my own trauma or something as a kid, like not like learning not to trust my own experience or whatever, or if it's just a thing that every artist needs to learn, because, there's this thing of like, I imagine young musicians seeing Lady Gaga wear meat dress and think, that's what you got to do, and take the wrong lesson rather than be like, no, what she did was follow her thing. That was her attention, and being able to trust and notice where your attention goes. That's such a difficult muscle to learn how to work. But then once you start getting it, I think that's the thing for me is, I'm kind of aware of like, I do think I know what my brain does. From doing the podcast for 10 years, a lot of these were monologues too.
You've spent a lot
I just
kind of
know like, that's one of those things that turns into something. But it takes a while
you begin to get a feel, don't you?
Yeah.
Like, I've got that feeling. I got that feeling. And you begin to know the sort of beats of your creative, because I'm like, I don't know, I'd say I'm exactly 2/3 through writing a book. And I know that because the day before yesterday, I had the watershed moment and I knew it had to come at some point. And until then, I was slogging towards it and feeling like nothing's working. What is this? What does this mean? What is the answer? And then, like, literally, that is my behavior every evening when I walk away from my desk. And then yesterday, I had a conversation that I thought was entirely unpromising. And I came home and it was like I mean, I was crying and I was like, my body felt different. And I was like, here it is. This is it. I knew, like, I know my process well enough to know that was going to happen. And I trusted it. But the first few times that happened, I thought I'd gone completely insane. And I know the last third of the book will happen really quickly now that was, because the whole emotional center of it has landed for me.
Oh, I love getting to talk to you in that moment because, the thing I think about a lot when I'm encouraging people to trust themselves, trust that interest or whatever, I'm trying to get across to somebody who's maybe never had that experience that you just described, or maybe had it once and didn't realize, like, I talk about it like a boomerang or not a boomerang. What's it called? The slingshot, a slingshot where at a slingshot,
which doesn't come back to you, fortunately.
Hopefully, unless you do it wrong, you can load it wrong and that can happen. But for me, the first time you have that happen, you can think, oh, the moment where everything changes when I let go, and totally ignore the fact that, oh, there's all this tension building that was also essential to, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I love that you said this because I wasted some of my college years in my early part of my practice because I just didn't have the confidence that this would come together, especially when it felt wrong. When you're sometimes in the early process, because it's not working, it feels wrong.
It feels grim. I mean, it feels like the opposite of what creativity is supposed to feel like.
Yes.
And I think probably the truth is that most people who feel like they failed don't push to that point.
Yeah.
They get deterred, like, quite rationally, honestly.
Yes.
But actually there is a direct parallel with the walk there, because I know when I was walking the Southwest Coast path and I was finding it so hard, and I was doing it through winter and I was alone and I'm not sporty, that there would be this kind of direct process of the first hour or so. It would be all about my discomfort and my doubts. And I'd, stop to relace my shoes and adjust the straps on my backpack and think, I can't do this. I'm too tired. My legs don't feel right. And then I'd hit this kind of flow and sense of, like, slight euphoria, actually. And I'd call it popcorn brain. And I'd be having all these ideas and I'd feel really excited. But then if I pushed on through past that, which I think probably most people don't walk for long enough in their life to get there, I would hit this place of, like, emptiness, beautiful, serene emptiness, that I wouldn't even remember that part of the walk. But in the days afterwards, I'd realize I'd processed something massive in that place. That, again, I'm back to my bicameral mind.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I love the way
creativity
that you
is so analogous to that.
Describe that, and I can think, as I'm reading, I can think back to the walks I've had where you do, like you say, just become a body towards the end, and it is this. It's really, and creativity is so like that. Yeah. I want to be sensitive to your time, and I wanted to ask just one more question, which was, having gone through the Enchantment world, I won't call it a journey. We won't say it was a journey, but it's the enchantment process. But
I might just have to live with that.
No, it's fine. I genuinely love a pushback. I love it. I need that. Like, I love both sides.
It's safe for us to do that. Yeah,
exactly. And also there's always new stuff in that.
Yes,
there's always new when someone's like, well, yeah, but here's the problem with that. I've learned to love it. So the last thing I was going to say was, in the enchantment process, I wondered if you had any like ritual or practice that has been, at least somewhat consistently fruitful for you. Because I think for me, going through burnout, that's the thing that I've been really thinking about. Like, I need, when I go on my phone, there are thousands, millions of new ideas. like new prompts, new ways to do it, all that stuff. And I've realized like, oh, my dopamine deprived ADHD brain freaking loves that, loves a new thing.
Like, drink it in,
Let's go. Yeah. But then I realized like, but my humanity cannot deal. I don't actually need any new thing. I am longing for what some of the old things where people had the ritual and that worked, you know, even if it just works 20% of the time, even less, whatever.
Well, but we used to trust the ritual and now we doubt it before we even get there. And I think that's, you know, like what I'm trying to learn to do. And my new book is a lot about this as well, is to just get into certain habits of undertaking the ritual and to stop questioning it, you know, to stop asking, do I belong here? Will I like it? Will I like the people here? Like none of that actually matters, because the thing that you will ultimately value is that you showed up and that you did it over and over again, and that you sat through it when it was boring, you know, because we've lost community, you know, we've lost the ability to withstand any tension in our lives, and we've walked away from it for really good reasons, but the loss has now become greater than the reasons that made it useful to us. Yeah. And that means that I am not meaningfully contributing to a community, to any community, because I'm not present in it, because I've allowed myself to not be present in it. And I am looking for that thing that I will just damn well show up to. But if you want it's not even a ritual, but it's something that I write about at the beginning of Enchantment. Yeah. When I was really stuck, when I was really burnt out, I kept a Post-it note stuck to my screen that said, go for a walk. And when I found myself like gazing into the middle distance or constantly picking up my phone, you know, that cycle of like, oh, I've opened Instagram. I didn't mean to, I'll close it. Oh, I've opened Instagram. Like, do you do that? It's
yes, I do.
Round and round. Ooh. Like that Post-it note was like, right, go for a walk, even if it's 5 minutes, even if it's just, I mean, I've got like loads of little alleyways around my house. Sometimes I just do a loop around those. It's fine. It will change. It will change something up. You'll notice something. You'll bump into someone. You'll pet a cat that you've passed. A new plant will have grown in that familiar place that you walk past every day. The air will smell different. The weather will be doing something, because it always is, because I'm in England. Like it's always weather to notice. Something will happen. And a lot of the times you'll end up walking for longer than you meant to. But even if you get back home, you'll come back with like fresh air on your clothes and you will feel differently. Like it's just do that. Just walk.
Yeah. And it speaks to that go into the woods and find something to bring home kind of thing. And it reminds me of, you know, the thing you were speaking to about finding community and habit and ritual, even if it's boring, even if there's problems with it. I think that I'm taking that as a greater theme, because I think our age, we have had the spirit of deconstruction and individualism and correcting and critiquing. And that has been the wilderness. It's been a really necessary thing, I think. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, no doubt.
But I think I feel like everybody's hurting for that ritual and that connection and that thing you're speaking to. So I love that.
You know what? Like when I was a kid, I asked my mum if I could take the Hoover apart. And she said, you can take it apart, but you got to put it back together again.
Ooh.
And I think I'm always
that in the new book?
Things apart. No, maybe it will be now though.
Ooh, I'm telling you,
maybe I'll add that.
I love it. It's a great image.
Early on the spring of the hatch and thinking I can't put this back together, so I'm gonna reverse out of this.
That symbol is like feels like society right now. It's like we broke it apart. Okay, but
definitely
there's a deal here.
Definitely take it apart, but you've got a responsibility to reintegrate it. And we've got to acknowledge that responsibility, because we have disintegrated and we're not okay because of it.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your writing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thank you for
to talk to you
inviting me.
again.
Like it was delightful to meet you, and it's a nice way to finish my week.
Awesome. Massive thanks to Katherine May for taking the time. I hope that I get to talk to her again because it is just truly enriching. And I'm so grateful for her work. It's really, really powerful stuff. And if you are burnout or you've lost your zest, maybe go check out Enchantment there. Or if you're going through kind of working out what's unique about you, or even maybe some level of neurodivergence, diagnoses, then maybe check out Electricity of Every Living Thing. I also recommend following her on Substack, katherinemay.substack.com. It's called The Clearing by Katherine May, and she's really active over there and has a really great community. Really appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. And I said I'd be back with a creative call to adventure. Here it is, Post-it note ritual. I love this thing that Katherine talked about where she has this Post-it note that says, go for a walk. And I wondered, you could do that. That could be yours. Or you could use that as a prompt and say, what needs to be on your Post-it note? What needs to be a regular everyday thing? What's something that tends to consistently help you regulate or get into your creative brain or get you out of a stuck place or a low place or just an overly stressed place? I started thinking about this for myself. And one thing that came to mind was take care of your dog. Now, yes, taking care of my dog is something I like to do in many ways, but I mean something different, which comes from a different author, Martha Beck, who is just a real wild individual. I heard her recently say that, you can treat yourself, your body, like a pet that you love, instead of waking up and saying like, all right, what does this creature need to get done today? Just starting with looking in the mirror and just saying, what do you need? When your dog is acting a certain way, you're thinking, or misbehaving, or even just acting weird or disruptive, your first guess is not, why aren't you being productive? First of all, but second of all, you're thinking, what do they need? And if you're waking up feeling bad and feeling out of whack, which I do very frequently, I've tried to, I can't always do it, but even just the self-love of looking in the mirror and being like, hey, what do you need today, man? You're tired? Like you need to take a nap today? You need to go to sleep earlier tonight? You need some enchantment? You need some, you need to listen to some new music? You need, whatever it is. I just found it really powerful. Like take care of your dog as a reminder to take care of yourself with the love and care that you do your pets and providing their needs. There's so many ways in which I can find myself ignoring my own needs. And so even throughout the day, I will think that recently, like, oh, I'm starting to be really unproductive, or I'm starting to feel really bad, or my brain is starting to spiral out like a dog doing, chaotic zoomies. And I, instead of just thinking, oh, you better get your crap together, I think, okay, man, what do you need? What do you need, dude? What's going on? And that's kind of become a little ritual for me. So that's my call to adventure for you, to just think about, what do you need to put on that Post-it note? What is something that you need as a regular reminder for your practice and well-being? All right. Thanks, Katherine May, for being here. Hope we get to do it again sometime. Thanks. Each episode of Creative Pep Talk is designed to help you maintain a consistent creative practice. If you're trying to transform your creativity from an infrequent hobby into a real discipline, sign up to our newsletter at andyjpizza.substack.com so that you never miss an episode. Creative Pep Talk is part of the Podglomerate Network. You can learn more at podglomerate.com. Massive thanks to my team, Sophie Miller for content editing and co-writing, to Connor Jones of Pinning Beautiful for editing and sound design, and thanks to all of you for listening. Until next time, stay pepped up.